Welcome to the Dr. Chris Podcast, a space where I delve into all things movement, fitness, and wellness related. Today's guest is Judd Lionheart, more commonly known as Judd Lionheart, a speed and performance coach with the National Strength and Conditioning Association. He is based out of Austin, Texas, where he works with athletes, helping them to achieve their performance goals. In the late 90s, Judd attended Truman State University on a football scholarship where he earned a degree in exercise physiology. While at Truman, he excelled in his position as a middle linebacker, accruing a number of honors. After graduating, he subsequently worked as the football team's strength and conditioning coach for 1 year before beginning a career as a sports medicine trainer. In 2006, Judd joined the U.S. Army and was later commissioned as an infantry officer. He has deployed to Iraq as a platoon leader with the 10th Mountain Division, and then again as a platoon leader with the 3rd Ranger Battalion in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was awarded a Bronze Star for service on 2 separate occasions, and after completing his 4-year service obligation, he returned to a career in fitness. He spent 2 years in Chicago as the fitness director of the World Gym before ultimately landing in his current home base of Austin, Texas. In our conversation today, we talk about Judd's approach to speed and performance training and his mantra, always be an athlete. We delve into exactly what the mantra means and how it is demonstrated in his training and coaching. We also speak about how his approach to training prepared him to excel as an athlete and later as a tactical operator. We discuss how his experiences as an operator has influenced his perspective on coaching and on motivation, and what has enabled him to not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk for such an extended period of time. For more insightful interviews from a wide range of athletes and professionals, subscribe to the Dr. Chris Podcast on YouTube. For long-form content related to human anatomy, injuries, and injury prevention, check out the Dr. Chris Raynor channel instead. And finally, if you're looking for exercise tips and workouts related to mobility and strength training, subscribe to my online gym, Human 2.0 Fitness, on YouTube. And now let's get to our guest. All right, so today I'm very excited. I have an amazing guest that I want to speak to. He's got some really interesting stuff that I want to cover in our conversation today. So today's guest is Judd Lionheart, and we're going to talk about a whole host of things. But first things first, my man, thank you very much for giving us the time to be on the show today. And first thing that I want to know, and everybody wants to know, who is Judd Lionheart?
That's way harder to answer than I thought it'd be. Honestly, man, I'm a normal dude that has normal struggles, both big and small in life. And I come from a Midwestern background, small town, grew up, working class family. And it just had a love for fitness my entire life in different aspects, and just a desire to help people as much as I can, because I've been helped by other people my entire life. Want everybody to be cooperative and advance the science of exercise and movement, because I feel like has great potential to help humans out in our day and age.
Excellent. And when I looked into your background, so you were a middle linebacker at Truman, and football was a big part of your life. Was football the only sport that you did? Well, actually, no. So you're a speed coach, so track was in there as well. But were those the only 2 sports you ever did, or did you do other things as well?
When I was younger, I played basketball and baseball up until about freshman in high school. So I have, whatever that adds to it. But a little bit of rugby in the Army. Really love rugby. But other than that, that's about it. Track and football are my main 2.
Okay, cool. And then when you did track, so you're a speed coach. So I'm assuming that you are like me. If you see anything on the track more than once, that's too far. So
I've never heard it put like that before. Like that.
Listen, I'll tell you. So I was a sprint hurdler. Okay, because I wasn't quite fast enough for the 100, and 200, like I did that on occasion, but my main sport was sprint hurdles. And one time we had a track meet, and for some reason the person who was supposed to do the 400 on the sprint medley, they were sick or whatever. So the coach asked me to do it, right? And so I've never run anything longer than a 200. And I was like, bro, man, how hard can this be? Like you run around the track once and it's a sprint. So So I quickly learned that, yeah, no,
Uh,
it's not quite the
I think
same.
I think we've all had something like that happen to us in track. So one time, they put me in the steeplechase. I had no idea what that was, so I thought it was only one lap around, and I smoked everybody in that lap. And I went to walk on the track. I don't even know how many more laps, but it was a lot. Like, no, you got 7 more laps or something. I'm like, what on earth did I just get myself into? It was the worst experience of my life.
Yeah, no doubt, man. And of course, when you start sucking, win, and dying is right when you're coming past the crowd, right?
Oh
And
yeah, yeah, that's exactly that's so true.
so I can 100% empathize because been there, done that. So tell me, Judd, what's your background in training in strength and conditioning training? So this is obviously a major component of what you do, and it's been a big part of your life. So what's your background in that?
So, long story, I'll try to condense it as much as possible. I grew up from a young age being very into like bodybuilding and superheroes. And then so very much into weightlifting from a young age. Like one of my favorite memories is we got this weight set, like an incline bench and a squat rack. And I live in northern Missouri, so it gets like cold in the wintertime. And I remember my brother and I being out there in like our snowsuits scraping ice off the weights so we can lift weights. You know what I mean? Like that's how much I loved it from a young age, right? I always told it could never be a career for me by the people that knew better, always discouraged from pursuing it. So ended up, trial and error, just pursuing my love. And that really helped me be a mentor with kids, telling them to go after what they love and not what they're told that they need to do. Um, Fast forward, college or high school football. I actually learned a lot from my high school football coach. We were a really small rural town, and for that kind of environment, he was far above and beyond what should be expected for a high school football coach. I mean, we were doing medicine ball work, plyometrics, advanced progressive weightlifting, and it really got me. It created a love for me. Um, Another quick story. I remember there was a liftathon where people were bench pressing these high school kids, and I remember being a 7th grader at the time, and they were bench pressing like 200 pounds, and to me at that time it seemed impossibly strong. Like, and I was thinking I can never be as strong as these. I looked up to these kids, right? And at the end, they invited all the younger kids down to try to bench press, and I'll never forget how much weight I did. It was 115 pounds what I bench pressed, right? And I got up, and that same coach slapped me on the back and said, "You're pretty strong." And though that one sentence was enough to instill the belief in me that I could be strong, and I'll never forget it. It was a turning point in my life where I felt, man, I can be strong. And that just goes to reinforce the power of our words, especially our youth, good or bad, and how we have to be very careful and deliberate about what we say, because that set me on a path in life that's completely different than the path I may have taken. And it's probably something that coach didn't even remember saying. I remember I came back years later and reached out to him and let him know how much it meant to me and how much of a mentor he was to me. So that started me down that journey. Loved it in high school, super into lifting weights, more like bodybuilding focused then, because I was that age. That's why I can kind of relate to dudes that age. And then after that, college football, so same kind of training, speed and power focused. But then after that, I went out to California and I was just a personal trainer for a couple of years, just doing the normal fitness training. That was when I was in my early 20s. And then 2005, I joined the Army. Just felt like I wasn't doing my part. And then I got introduced to the tactical side of things, like more robustness, resilience training, mental fortitude type training, combat oriented training with gear on, things like that. Was in the Army for about 5 years. So at that time, I had my degree in exercise science. Thought I knew everything and didn't know anything. Um, at that point, then I became the fitness director at a world gym in Chicago for about a year, moved and accepted a role about 12 years ago, out here in Austin, Texas, with Acceleration Sports Performance. At the time, it was just the owner and me. And, for about a year, we were working 7 days a week, more kids than we could handle. I was sleeping here and just really dove into speed training. Like, I thought I knew a lot about speed training, but I didn't know anything. And about 12 years ago, I started to really dive into speed training, listen to as many Olympic coaches and track coaches as I could, doing as much research as I could. And that has been my main area of focus for about 12 years now. But in the mornings, I still train adults, and the adult population has been more of an older crowd, so 40 to 70. And so it really gained me some perspective on how to adjust training to fit their needs. And also in the afternoons and evenings, though, that's when the speed clients would come in, and those are normally younger kids, like 9 to 15. So you got two populations that are really vulnerable for different reasons, but it really forces you to adapt and be creative. And I really credit that just with the sheer amount of hours that I've trained. It's probably close to 30,000 hours of training now that I've completed, and with like helping me, and then my own injuries as well.
Mhm.
So I've gotten older, done stuff wrong, had some pretty bad injuries that I've had to work around. Probably had every minor injury you can think of over the course of my career. So when somebody comes in with an injury, I can guarantee you I've trained somebody with that injury, but I also probably have suffered from it. And we're talking everything from every kind of tendonitis you can have to nerve damage, torn rotator cuffs, torn meniscus. Like I've had it all, pulled hamstrings, avulsion fractures. And so I don't really come across injuries very often that I feel like I'm not able to help somebody with, you know.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Very, very long background.
Listen, no, it's all good. And there was a few things I'm always writing notes as people talk. So there's a couple of things that I want to touch on that you just talked about. So one of the things that you said that I see in myself is when I think back to things that people told me that I would not be able to do, right? Like I'm not going to be able to. So there's a couple of things parallels with yourself that sort of drew me to you when I started watching you, and one of them is being the football. So I played football at Western University. So I'm Canadian, and at that time, so that's it, I'm about 10 years older than you. So at that time, '88, Western University was like one of our sort of Ivy League top tier football teams. And I had always said I had been recruited elsewhere, but it was like, no, I'm going to go there because they're the best in the country. No, you can't play there. You're not going to be able to play there, right? So I did that. Ended up doing that. I wanted to try to play professional football, so I was trying to make the CFL, which is our NFL equivalent. And no, man, you can't do that. Can't. No, you're not going to make. Got drafted. Uh, you're never going to get into medical school. Did that. You're never going to become an orthopedic surgeon. Did that. So I like this idea of you empowering young people to know that they are very capable, man. And people may say you cannot do this thing, right? But that's not, in fact, the case, right? It's that the person saying that doesn't have the self-confidence in themselves to think that it is possible, or they don't know how to facilitate you doing that thing, but it doesn't mean that you can't. So I really think that that's very important, and I really like that. And I also like what you said there. You're training two different populations, because we see this. I also own a gym, and we see this with our own clientele, because we treat professional athletes, Olympic athletes, and trains these high level athletes, but we also do the general population, including the elderly. And one of the things that I think that we are very good at, which you just talked about, is being able to regress and progress activities and exercises. And it comes back to the main thing that drew me to your profile is your name. Always be an athlete, right? Because I tell people this all the time. Everybody's a fucking athlete. Everybody, even the grandma who's 75, her sport may just be playing with her grandkids, picking up her groceries. That's her sport. But when she comes,
when I hear people say I'm not an athlete, I hate that. I hate it.
No, exactly.
Tell them not.
Exactly, man. And I say to them, I'm gonna make her the best damn grandkid picker upper and grocery getter out of anybody, right? Everybody's an athlete, and
So like, let's say this lady is carrying groceries in the house, right?
Yeah.
And there's something in her way, and she just stumbles over and does a little quick-footed thing. She was just athletic. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love what you said there. So you say it's long, but it gives us the background, gives us the story, and I think that is amazing. So it's a perfect segue to my next question, which is, if you were to characterize your training, right? What would you say is the main thrust of your training, and what is your core training philosophy?
Okay. I would say purpose driven. Always ask myself, what is the purpose of this? You know what I mean? What effect, what adaptation is this training eliciting in myself? Not how does it feel, or not, what I've been told, but based on my own research, what adaptation am I trying to accomplish with this training? Secondly, I believe in minimal effective dose. So if you can do something and get the same result with fewer sets or duration or volume, I tend to lean towards that, because what it does is it saves time, energy, and focus for other things that can enhance your physical and mental abilities. So if doing 2 sets of heavy bench press does 95% of what doing 10 sets of heavy bench press would do, I'm going to do the 2 sets. Not because I don't love the bench press, because that's going to free up time and energy that I can dedicate to other athletic pursuits that I love. And always a reason-based approach. And I always say, some people look at my stuff that I do in there and think it's fancy or complicated. It really is simple movements that just have an added element to optimize elements of that movement. And I am a simple person. I like to dumb things down. And if you can get the result from something simple, I always say simple done well is better than fancy done wrong. And I use that in all of my training with my kids. So if my kids don't have any movement limitations, a simple back squat is totally fine for them, but if they do, that's when I have the toolkit to either regress or progress or adjust the exercise to fit that kid or person. So that's what my page is about. It's not just trying to be fancy and cool. It's trying to give people give people ideas so that they have a larger toolkit. If something doesn't feel right or it hurts, I want them to know they have options.
I think that's freaking fantastic, man. And I think knowing how to expand the exercises and the exercise variations that are available to you so that you can achieve a specific goal despite your limitations. Like, I think that that's very powerful, right? And I like the idea of educating, number one, knowing that, but number two, more importantly, is educating the athlete or the person so that they know that, right? So what's the goal here? What are we trying to accomplish? Oh yeah, well, geez, my soleus is kind of tight on this side. I can't get the depth of squat that I want. So what's the adaptation? What's the variation that I can do to deal with that so that I can get the depth of squat that I'm looking for, right? So, and I think that that's very important. That athletes.
So as far as terminology goes, I like to stay away from the term exercise, because exercises are finite by nature. There's a list and a catalog. Movements are infinite. So when I just got asked this on comments like 10 minutes before we got on here. And I get to ask this all the time. What is the name of this exercise? And I was like, you're going to find that most of the things on my page don't have names, because if I tried to name it, the name would be long and cumbersome when the movement is fluid and simple. So for instance, I was doing a movement and I was like, well, if I was going to name it, it would be a mixed stance, pseudo single leg, 90-degree hip extension with a Zercher hold. Nobody wants to remember that.
Yeah.
But the movement is just a simple fluid movement,
Yes.
So we try to define things as in terms of exercises rather than just explore human movement and how we can utilize that to benefit our goal.
For sure. Well, here's something to think about. So one of the things, so right now I'm about 90% done. I keep telling people this, 90 or maybe 95% done a course that I'm going to be putting out for trainers and physios. And one of the things that I talk about there is physical literacy. And I talk about how human movement is a language. It is a language no different than any other language, right? And you have just the same way in a spoken language, you have letters, you have phonemes, or letters, consonants, words, phrases, sentences, blah blah blah. You have all of those things. You have the same thing in human movement. And if you think about, for example, let's just relate this to sport for a moment. If you think about someone, say LeBron James, Michael Jordan, or Wayne Gretzky, right? The first two people, they spoke basketball at the level of Shakespeare. right? Because they had a wider variation or a wider range of movements, a wider range of novel combinations of movements that allowed them to control themselves in space better than their opponents, right? Same thing with Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky wasn't the biggest hockey player. He had to make do with what he had, right? He couldn't be as physical, so he had to be able to skate better, move better, be quicker, be more agile. And so at him, if you look at what his vocabulary was and compared that to the next hockey player, he had a larger vocabulary, right? And so I love what you're doing with these movements. And all you are doing is you are exploring different combinations of letters, different combinations of consonants to make and develop new words. And potentially, when you string those new words together, you have different phrases so that you can speak the language of physical literacy and movement
Absolutely.
at a higher level, man. That's what I
So
think.
I love that analogy as far as the vocabulary, because Shakespeare was an artist, right? He was an artist with words. And so those athletes have turned this into an art, right?
Yes.
And so my analogy is, I get this all the time. You post so many clips, aren't you afraid you're going to, quote, run out of exercises? And here's my analogy going along with the art theme. There are only 3 primary colors, right? And out of those 3 colors, we have created millions of colors and then combined those colors into the most beautiful artwork. And no one is afraid that an artist is going to run out of ideas for paintings, right? No one's going to say, hey, don't paint so much, you're going to run out of ideas for paintings. No one ever says that.
Mhm.
So if we can make millions of colors out of 3 primary colors, there's what I consider 7 basic human movements depending on how patterns,
Mhm.
plus a plethora of subtle movements like, like adduction, abduction, internal, external rotation, eversion, inversion, blah, blah, blah. If you can take the 7 primary plus all those subtle ways humans move, if you can make millions of colors out of 3 primary, imagine how many movements you can create just by using those simple concepts.
Mhm.
It is literally, I'm not exaggerating, it is literally, our movement is literally limitless.
Yes. It's almost impossible, actually. When you put it that way, it's impossible for one human being to run out of movement patterns, right? There's so
And
many
then
different things you can explore.
they always say, oh, you invented this. I didn't invent this. I didn't invent human movement.
Yeah, yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah. So, having said all of that, if you were to think about how you train yourself and how you train individuals, is there um, I don't necessarily want to use this word, but for lack of a better word, is there a foundation to your training or coaching approach? In other words, like when I think about it, when we're talking to fitness professionals, you say, oh, well, like I'm a conventional strength training coach, or I'm CrossFit oriented. I'm more focused on kettlebells. I'm more gymnastic strength training. Like, is there a foundation to your approach?
So, those are schools of thought, the kettlebell school, the TRX school. I don't have any of that. I use any tool that I can see that I can use in any way. But my philosophy when I train kids is find the cornerstone, find the simplest thing that matters the most at that time.
Mhm.
And I always say practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So you scale it down, you slow it down, you simplify it until whatever they are practicing can be perfect, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
nobody can go out and practice a perfect run, but they can practice a perfect dorsiflexion. They can pattern the knee tuck slowly so many times that it becomes perfect. And then what we do is we speed it up and we add on to perfect. So I'm always trying to add on to perfect. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Sometimes, and I have to reinforce these kids when I'm training them, it's going to get frustrating because, you don't fear the man that's practiced 10,000 things, right? You fear the man that's practiced one thing 10,000 times.
Yes.
And so at first, it's about repetition. And it's about me not letting them do it wrong just because they lacked focus.
Mhm.
So I'm never going to ask an athlete to do anything at that point that they can't do because of skill.
Mhm.
The only times they don't do it perfectly at that moment is because they lose focus.
Mhm.
So at first, especially with my athletes, I hammer them down. I'm positive and I encourage them, but I stay on them. I don't let them do a movement unless it's perfect. you know, and we build on perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my philosophy, build on perfect, you know?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I like about that, you know, when I think back to how I learned skills as a surgeon and how I train junior trainees, I remember one of the things that I remember most vividly from one of my preceptors. He used to say to me, you know, slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
That's one of my favorite sayings, man. I love it.
It's just like racing, right? But he, and what he was trying to drive home, because he would say that to me, but at the same time, he would also say, you know, if the OR started at 8 o'clock, right? He would say, okay, you're going to start the case today. Whatever you have done by 8:15, that's what you have done. And then I'm taking over. So I'm thinking, I got to be fast. I got to be fast. But what I learned, you know, I didn't really learn this in residency because you didn't really understand it. I understood it when I became an independent practitioner, right? Because when I first started working for myself, okay, the buck stops here. I am the one who's ultimately responsible. Holy shit, that's really scary. I'm going to take my time. And I can remember there are cases, the first time I did them, 4 hours, man, 4 hours, right? And what I worked on doing though is just becoming better at those cases. I did not work specifically on getting faster. I worked on getting better and being more efficient, more smooth. And guess what? Over time, like now, I do that same case in 45 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And it just flows. And it's not because I tried to get faster. I just tried to become more efficient, more smooth, and just because of the constant repetition, bang, 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 bang.
So what you just said verbatim is one of my core tenets. It's so funny you brought that up. I actually had a shirt made that said that on the back: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I probably say that 100 times a day to kids. And it started in the military. They used it in the military when we were doing CQB, and they complicated. And everybody wanted to rush, because when you're afraid, or when you're afraid either to get hurt or you're afraid that you're not going to be good at something, you want to rush through it, right? You want to get after it. And, you know, I was taught to always slow things down. And then just like you said, you don't have to force the quickness. After a while, the quickness just flows, you know? And that is one of my all-time favorite sayings. Man, it's so funny you brought that up. I love it so much. I actually have a shirt made with the saying, and I wear it to work to remind kids. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
I'm not sure exactly why, but I knew from the moment I saw your stuff, and then you know, just seeing what you're doing, and then I reached out to you. I was like, man, I'm gonna have a lot in common with this dude. I'm not sure what gives me that sense, but I felt that. So it's interesting that we love that, but because I say it all the time, I think it all the time. And so let me. This is one of my favorite questions here that I want to ask you, because this is something that is true to my own heart. Okay, so tell me about your handle, okay, on Instagram, and tell me, what does it mean for you? Always be an athlete. Okay, so talk to me about this. Tell me why is it that you have this approach to training and coaching, and finally, how does this philosophy better prepare your clients for the demands, whatever their demands are, when compared to any other approach?
So as I got older, the people that I started associating with that were my age, they focused less and less on athleticism and more on how they looked. But they were always unhappy with their life based on their limitations, you know? They wanted to look young more than they wanted to feel young. And the defining factor of youth is just basic athleticism. And I'm not talking about necessarily speed and power and strength. I mean, it plays a role in it, but just fluidity of movement, comfort in your own body, robustness, so you're not spraining ankles or blowing out knees all the time. And then I started to think about what defines an athlete, because I feel like I hear it all the time. Well, I'm not an athlete. I'm not an athlete. And I think they think athletes are people that are always in a set competition with rules, right? Oh, you know, but then I look around and I see people being athletic every day, climbing rocks, like, you know, rock climbers, and they're not in a competition. They're just out there exploring, human movement and enjoying the body, this amazing thing that we've been given. They're just enjoying it and enhancing it, right? So that kind of became my overriding goal, was that like there's no reason we have to stop being athletes. And I just feel it's like overwhelmingly sad to me when I feel people give up on their athleticism in their early 20s,
Mhm.
and they want to work out and they want to look like an athlete, but they don't want to be an athlete until it's time to do something athletic. And then they always regret that they're no longer an athlete. It's like, it's this moment of sadness to them, and I just hate when I see people sad or disappointed. And, I always say, like, we do everything and we spend an ungodly amount of money to try to hang on to our youth, right? We get Botox and cosmetic surgery, and we take steroids and growth hormone and hair plugs and weight loss pills. But if I had to think about youth, the one defining characteristic of youth is kids run. You're always having to tell them to stop run.
Mhm.
They don't jog, right? They sprint. At the moment's notice, a kid is sprinting, and then they're tumbling and they're jumping, and when they lift something, they hardly ever throw their back out. I've never seen a 7-year-old throw his back out, you know, and like that is the characteristic of youth. That is youth in a nutshell. It is not smooth skin or big muscles. That's not young.
Mhm.
So I think we've missed the mark. I just don't understand how, sprinting is the epitome of youth to me. You know what I mean? A kid doesn't go out and naturally want to jog.
They want, they
Now
want
I
to get
understand the joy in jogging,
yeah,
like I got it, but
yeah, they want to get everywhere fast. And one thing I want to touch on that you mentioned there, because again, I say the same thing to people. People come into our facility, right? And they oh, like, can you show me how to lose weight? Can you do this and blah blah blah? And I say to them, like, if you look at an athlete, right? Um, Generally speaking, there are lots of different body types depending on what sport people are in. But generally speaking, as a whole, if you say to a person, the average person, would you like to have your body look like what yours does? Or would this athlete's body looks like? And generally they go, oh shit, yeah, I'd like to be like that. I'd like to be lean. I'd like to be muscular. And I'm like, well, those athletes are not trying to lose weight. They're not trying to lose bulk a specific thing. All they're doing is trying to be athletic and trying to be able to achieve a certain functional demand. That's all they're trying to do. And as a byproduct, they look like that.
so I say that all the time. It's so true. So it's funny. I use track athletes as the example, right? But I could use a number of different athletes. Let's say women first. Women want to achieve a certain look, so they go out and they jog long distance, right? But if I were to show them pictures of track athletes, the ones that 99% of them want to look like fall somewhere between the 100-meter sprinter and maybe the 800-meter runner. Usually it's between 400 and 200, right?
Yep.
Most women want to look like that body type. And most men, they want to, be big and muscular. But most men, when you show them pictures of track athletes, they want to look like either somewhere between the 100-meter runner and the 400-meter runner.
Yep.
But no one trains like that. Like, it's so spot on what you said. It's like, why do we train in a way where the proven athletes, and I love distance running. It's an amazing thing to me, right? But most women don't want to look like the 12K runners. They just don't want to look like that.
Yeah.
So that's what happens when you take that to extreme. You get that body type because their body has to adapt to optimally be able to form that event.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. So, why do you think that this approach, or the always be an athlete mantra, why do you think that this is the preferred method? Well, it's not necessarily. Again, I never tell anybody I know everything, and what I do is the only way to do it. But this is what works for you. Why do you feel that it's the preferred approach to train your clients and athletes?
So within my preferred approach, there's a lot of leeway to tailor it to a person's individual goals or, needs and things like that. So like you said, it's not necessarily my way, but unless you have a specific goal in mind to be like the best in the world at something, specialization by definition leads to dysfunction and suboptimalization in other avenues. If you want to be the best bench press in the world, you almost assuredly are not going to be the best 200-meter sprinter. There is no way. So if you choose to specialize, just understand, if you want to get really good at something, you're going to have to give up something. And I want you to make an informed decision before you choose to do that. So if you want to train like a bodybuilder, just understand that those bodybuilders have made a conscious decision to give up other athletic abilities in order to look like that. Are you ready to give that up? And if so, more power to you. It's your path. But if you're not, I strongly discourage you from being just a bodybuilder. Now, I'm more relatable to guys because I like bodybuilding too. I like having big muscles, and there's a bodybuilding element to my training. I don't hate on bodybuilding exercises. I think there's an aesthetic appeal to having bigger muscles, but I understand that it's a detriment to my performance after a certain point. It already is a detriment to me. Let's be honest. If I wanted to optimize my athletic performance, I would lose muscle mass. Let's just be honest there. So I'm having to train extra hard just to make up for the detriments that carrying too much muscle mass has already done to me. You know what I mean? But there's also a balance there, right? Like I like having big muscles. I want to move. So I try to strike that balance. I believe that life is about balance.
Well, let me ask you a question. So how tall are you?
6'1".
6'1", and how much do you weigh?
About 255.
Jesus. Okay. So I'm 6'2", and I'm generally about 210. So that's 45 pounds more. So that's a lot of muscle mass for sure. And yeah, it's a lot that you have to move around, and that comes at a cost. But one of the things that I really like when I look at your content is, and I am even more impressed now that I know how large you are, is just that the speed at which, like the speed that you demonstrate when you were sprinting, and also the quickness that you demonstrate when you're doing your movements, like, is phenomenal. And this just it reminds me of something. Let me go off track here for a second. So I told you before I was trying to become a professional football player for a period. And I remember, when I was in high school, I was one of the fastest on the team. Okay. One of them, and I got by sheer athleticism. When I went to my university, you get lots of the fastest kids from all of their high schools. But I was still athletic enough and fast enough to still be, on a roster of 85 athletes. I was still in the top 10. Okay, at my university, and then I went to the pros, and the people who are drafted are all of the best from their team, right? And so I got by on athleticism. I was a boundary corner. I got by on sheer athleticism in university, and I went to my meetings. I listened to I listened to all the stuff, all the plays and all the weekly breakdowns, but all that stuff kind of went over my head, because I was like, I'm a boundary corner. I'm gonna shut down people. I'm faster than them. I can cover them. Whatever. So that was how I got by in university. But when I went to the pros, so even though it's the CFL, they have prototypical Canadian and American positions, which I did not know at the time. So when I went, I was boundary corner. They drafted me as a boundary corner. And when I showed up, they said, well, you're Canadian, so you can be left half or free safety. Now, keep in mind, up until this point, I had only just relied on my athleticism. I knew a little bit about what was going on in the box, but not really. It was just like, whoever comes out here, I'm covering them. So then they were like, well, you got to be left half a free safety. Which one do you want to be? And I had no clue. And in hindsight, I should have been a free safety, because that's a prototypical Canadian position. And it gives you more free reign. Anyway, I was like, I'll just be left half, right? Not realizing that I had to know, what are the stunts? What's happening in the box? What are the linemen doing? What are the linebackers doing? It was overwhelming. But the thing that made it more difficult was that everybody was an athlete, and everybody was a beast, and everybody could move like you. And I was like, holy shit. Like these guys are like, I can't get by on sheer athleticism anymore because everybody is moving that way. And I'm not the fastest guy anymore because all of the fastest guys are here. And I'm just like one of everybody else. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's quite interesting that you are the size that you are and you move with speed and the quickness that you do. So I think that's a testament to how much, effort that you put in, because as you said, to be that size, to be that speed, there are trade-offs, but you seem to have found the right balance, and when I think about you being a middle linebacker, holy shit, man. I know that you had a number of awards when you were playing. And when I think about somebody your size moving at a very high rate of speed, and the Mike linebacker is all over the place. Like they're on their name gets announced on almost every play. Oh, yeah, and Lionheart in on the tackle because you're everywhere, right? So I imagine that must have been very scary for opposing teams.
So very, very similar to your experience. When I was in college, so I think one of the reasons I make a good mentor is because I'm not different than these kids. I wasn't an extremely hard worker. I made the mistakes of not having due diligence and preparing my body. So when I was in college, I didn't study film enough. I didn't work on the things I needed to work on. I focused on the things I liked to do and was already good at. I like to do bodybuilding more than I like to do the exercise that I knew in my heart of hearts would probably make me a better football player. So I was good in college. But I never really got to the pro. Injuries played a part. I never really got in the pros because I never worked on the two things, my pass rush skills and my cover skills, right? I was great against the run. I could stop anything. I had a school record for tackles for a loss for 20 years and all that. Great against the run. I was never superb at pass coverage. And I knew it, and I didn't work on it. You know what I mean? So it's a maturing process. You know what I mean? And I feel like the pros are these guys. Everybody thinks they're the best athletes, and sometimes they are. Normally, they're not. They're the guys that are superb athletes, but also mature fast enough to know that they need to work on what they want to get better at. Because we've all known the guy in high school, middle school that was the best athlete we've ever seen. The best athlete I've ever seen was in high school. You know what I mean? I think he's working construction now, right? And it just, and no hit on him because I'm the same way. Like he just didn't prepare and dedicate himself to that craft. And that's the thing I see with NFL players and CFL players more than anything else is they are dedicated to the profession and they do the small things right. They know they need to do to optimize what they do.
It's funny, I as you're talking there, I think back to my time in football, and one of my so this is one of my best friends now, and he and I joke about this because he was an all Canadian every year. So he was a corner as well, and he was a wide side corner, and but he was all Canadian every year that he played right from the start. And we used to laugh because he never spent any time barely in the gym. He was the least like hardworking dude in terms of the gym. But what he looked at every film. He had such an in-depth understanding of, like, even though he was a corner, he was basically like a quarterback on the field because he would look at the field. He would look at, like what down is it? What's going on? He would just know where he had the knack of knowing where the ball is going to be. And he would always, like, even though, I was faster than him or whatever, he just knew he was in the right place at the right time because of that dedication that you're talking about. And that is a prime example that although I love athleticism, it's not always the athleticism that's going to separate people, right? Because for him, there were many athletes that were much, much stronger, much faster than him, but he just knew where to be, right? And he was always in the right place at the right time. Always.
I feel like we always forget that in our strength training community because we're so focused on that it's a skill. Practice your skill. I always tell kids never come to me for speed training or strength training or power training if it means that you have to skip a practice. Practice your skill. first. I'm here to enhance that skill. And if you're not a skilled football player, I can make you the strongest, fastest kid in the world, and you're still going to be a strong, fast kid that's not skilled at football. You know? And that's why people think steroids makes football players. No, it is cheating because they enhance what they already have. But if you're not athletic, you can take every steroid in the world. You're just going to be a big, strong, fast guy that sucks at football. You know? Like Barry Bonds cheated, let's be honest. But if that dude didn't already know how to hit a baseball, none of that would have done him any good.
For sure.
You know?
For sure. Well, and you know, I think about that reminds me of what was his name? Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong freaking cheated, dope to the gills. But many of those guys that are cyclists all do the same thing. And even amongst that field, he still won the Tour de France 7 times. So I am not an advocate of what he did, but if he did not have the drive, the skill, and all of that first,
I think a lot of what made people mad at him was because the intimidation he tried to use to keep his brand, the intimidation to keep people quiet. Because if you look back at every person, I might be getting this stat slightly wrong, but at one point in time, I think every person that had stood on that podium for the last decade had been banned for some kind of performance enhancer at least once in their career. So the majority of those guys were doing it. And at that point in time, to be able to ride a bicycle on average 27 miles an hour for 2,400 miles, you have to be taking something that will help your body recover. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think with Lance, I think it was the tactics he used that got him, you know, that name. But yeah, you're absolutely right, man. It's a very common thing, especially in that sport. And they all know it, you know?
Yeah. So you train athletes for strength, speed, and performance. Okay. But you also train operators for tactical skills or tactical training. So how does that differ from training in other, the conventional disciplines, speed, strength, blah, blah, blah?
So, you know, we have to start with what is the task that you're going to be asked to do, or the task, you know, like what is this? This is designed to help you be better at what you're doing, right? And with what you have to do in the military, you need a basic level of strength and speed and power for sure. But more so than that, you need to train your energy systems, your mental resilience, your work capacity, your robustness to be able to sustain yourself and still perform at a high level for movements that are going to occur when you're not well rested, you're not well fed. You know, athletes, we always set the stage as much as possible to optimize our performance, right? So we get good sleep, we control our stress, we make sure we're hydrated, we make sure we're fed, we make sure our electrolytes are balanced. Tactical operators have none of those benefits. They will literally be moving through the desert when they run out of water, so they're going to have to operate in a dehydrated state without eating for several hours or even days, without sleeping properly. So they have electrolyte balances. And then stress. I mean, they will go and be, you know, in the sympathetic system for hours on end, right? And they have to be able to perform in that environment. So even if I train an operator for a 40-inch broad jump and be able to run a 5-mile at extraordinary pace, that hasn't prepared him for that if he hasn't trained in a way that's going to be, so he'll be able to control his, you know, energy systems so that he can keep going and not, you know, deplete his glycogen reserves and mentally and physically crash on the objective. So if an operator gets to an objective after a 5-mile foot movement through like the mountains, even if they get there fast, if once they get there, if they're mentally depleted to the point where they can't complete that objective of an unknown duration, you don't know how long that objective is going to take. That's another thing. Tactical athletes is always an unknown duration. You're not moving for an hour. You're moving till the mission is complete. So as strength coaches, we need to completely unlearn everything we've learned and start from scratch and be like, what does this athlete need from me? You know, and that's a very hard thing for us to do. You know, we're like, make sure you hydrate, make sure you do this. Well, maybe try not hydrating this time and see how your body can adapt to this. And I know that's not perfectly healthy, but you know what you're going to be asked to do. So the schools that we went to, we didn't eat, we didn't sleep, we were dehydrated, we cramped up, we got infections. And they're like, okay, now with all of this stuff that they purposely, not to make us mentally tough necessarily, but to train us in an environment to be leaders when all of those things, you have an infection in your elbow, you have a scratched cornea, you are cramping up from electrolyte imbalance, maybe you've been wounded. Now, can you lead and complete this objective? So that is the type of training. Now, I'm not going to tell trainers how to do that, but now you know what they're going to have to do. Now you figure it out, you know?
Mhm.
And I think some guys are disappointed when they come to me. It's not what they think. I'm not going to be testing their vertical jump all the time. I
Mhm.
don't care how much they can bench press. I don't care how much they can squat, really, after a certain basic level of human strength, you know? And then
So,
as far as physiology goes, muscle mass. I don't want these guys to be extraordinarily lean, and I don't want them to be extraordinarily muscular, because if they're too lean, then they have no energy reserves, and if they have too much muscle, muscle demands energy. Muscle
mhm,
cramps up. You know,
mhm,
muscle creates waste products. Muscle is heavy. No, I don't want you to gain a lot of muscle. You can
mhm.
look like a bodybuilder later. Now you're an operator. You know.
So so give me a few factors then in specific that you consider when you are thinking about how to program for tactical operators versus the regular population.
So, robustness. Can you keep moving day after day and not have crucial things break down on you? Core strength, mobility, tendon health, foot health. I'm foot tendons, of course, but those are specific body parts. Like I got to make sure your arch is strong. I got to make sure Achilles tendons are supple, and that goes beyond just flexibility.
Mhm.
I got to make sure that you have a mobile T spine and you can flex and pick up objects with spinal flexion. If all I have you doing is picking up objects with a neutral spine all the time, what happens when you have to bend over, flex your spine, and pick up a dude wearing 100 pounds worth of kit? You have to train for what you're gonna be expected to do. So I'll have them lift Atlas stones with out of breath, so they can't brace properly, progressing safely. You
Yeah.
know, things like that. Have them do something that requires accuracy and mental toughness while they're gassed. I used to do this thing called stress chest if I had more than one guy, where they have to make a move in chest, but while they're deciding on that move, their partner is doing burpees, and their
Mhm.
partner will. And so in the back of their mind, he is suffering the longer that I take. But you can't rush and make a fast decision, because that's going to hurt you too.
Yeah.
So like, you have a mental thing to accomplish. Your buddy's suffering. You're in a rush, but you still have to make a good decision. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Things like that. So you have to be creative.
Yeah, no, and one of the things that I like, there's a lot of things to think about, and one of the things that you mentioned, which I think a lot of trainers completely overlook. You were talking about tendon health, and I remember, so one of the people that I talked to on here was Matt Wenning, okay, and so Matt Wenning was a world level power lifter, and at one point he was doing programming for training for Army Rangers. And one of the things that he had said to me is, a lot of guys, a lot of trainers, they use plyometrics, but they don't consider tendon health. And he was saying how he does not do any he said, unless you can squat 2 times your body weight, your tendons are not robust enough to be able to they do not have the stiffness which will allow you to benefit from plyometric training. So why throw that in there? And this is just an insight where people go, oh yeah, plyometrics, let me throw this into the program. And it's like, well, yes, you might have the muscle that will allow you to do that, and you may have the bone density that will allow you to do that, but in order for you to make the most of this exercise without potentially injuring yourself, the thing that connects the muscle to the skeleton, you need to make sure that it is also robust. And if you know anything, you know that the rate of metabolism for the tendons is about 1/9 of that of what it is for muscles and for bones. So it takes a inordinate amount of time to develop that, right? And that's something that I think it's just a little point, but I think a lot of people don't even consider that, right?
That's one of the things that makes steroids extraordinarily dangerous, is the muscles get stronger exponentially faster than the tendons. And I'm not going to tell people not to do steroids, and if there's responsibility there. But the first thing I says, hey, you're going to feel really strong, man. Be careful. Be
Yes,
careful, because those
yes,
muscles are attached to something that is not as strong as those muscles yet. And they
yes.
never listen. and they always tear tendons,
Yes.
always.
I
And people think if you do steroids, it's like it'll make you crazy and all this other stuff. It's like, okay, whatever, or kill you or give you cancer. Before that, any of that happens, you're probably going to tear a tendon off a bone. Just so you
for
know.
sure. For sure.
Um, and then also, like with plyometrics, we're so compartmentalized in our thinking. What is a plyometric? I mean, we think it has to be a box jump or a depth jump or a broad jump or a split jump. Well, jumping rope is a plyometric. So I would only disagree in the sense that, like, I agree with them that, like, before you do these intense plyometrics, you need a level of strength for sure. But there's a whole spectrum of plyometrics that even people that are 90 years old can do. You know what I mean? Hanging onto two chairs and just kind of hopping up on both feet slowly is a form of a plyometric. You know what I mean? So it's a spectrum training. You know what I mean?
Yes, no, I like that. I like that. So, and this perfectly segues into my next question. So, how does your training differ when you are now training somebody from the perspective of rehabilitation?
So normally, I'll get them right when they're out of the rehab and before they're expected to go back into full performance with no limitations. So it's, to me, in my opinion, maybe it's because I do it, that is the most crucial period, because that is the period where they are completely not ready to perform at full speed yet, and it gets completely overlooked. So they will have, let's take an ACL, right? They will have regained full range of motion. They will have done all the balance work, maybe some body weight split squats and some step ups and all the traditional, some terminal knee extensions, all the traditional rehab exercise after ACL. But then that was never built upon. Speed and force and load was never added up on that. So these kids are expected to go from that, where you're doing a banded knee extension, into a 200-pound back squat. So I bridge that gap. So I start where they were. I add elements using bands, load, force, angles, lever length, fulcrum, moment arm, gradually to gradually and safely progress the stress that that knee in that case, is going to have to endure before they are able to be a full athlete again. And it varies from athlete to athlete. So I can't give anyone like a standard program, because I have to, a lot of times there's nerve damage and stuff that's limiting still, or the tendon on the other knee, if it was harvested from, isn't ready to go, or the hands, there's so many different variables there. But yeah, it's just progression to bridge that gap.
Sure. And one of the things that I like, what I saw just recently in your feed, is you talking about bands. And I think that was yesterday, where, a lot of strength athletes will be like, bands, like what is that for girls? And it's like, you were saying, like, don't shit on bands, man. Bands are great for a number of reasons. And the post was like 7 reasons why bands are good. And so I like that. And I think that is very novel and interesting approach, because a lot of people are like, man, bands are weak sauce, so I think that's good.
My whole thing is, too, bands used in isolation are great, but they don't have to be. They can be attached to free weight and cable weight exercises to create a hybrid feel that in some cases makes the best out of both worlds. Like, one of the best things about bands is the accommodation that they offer. As they get stretched, the tension goes up. So you can use that to accommodate movements, to where somebody can get a great load where they're the strongest, but when they're the weakest, since the tension the band eases off, it's still a safe load that they can get a fairly full range of motion with. People that are purists with free weights, and I love free weights, but it's almost like this misnomer. You say free, right? But a free weight is not free. A free weight is dictated by gravity. So they say you can do whatever movement path fits your body the best with a free weight. That's not exactly true, because you're dictated by that path of gravity. You can't use whatever movement. You have to move it with gravity. So if you want to change the angle, no, it doesn't work, because gravity always pulls in the same direction.
Sure.
Where sometimes machines, as counterintuitive as this will sound, will free you up, because no matter how you push on that machine, the resultant force is still the same path. So if I can't hold external rotation in order to push a dumbbell straight over my head, I have to relax my external rotators, because I have a torn rotator cuff or something. I can apply internal rotation, internal force to that lever, and push on it and it'll still go straight up,
Mhm.
you know? So having something on occasion locked into a movement path will actually free you up. I
Mhm.
know that's hard for people to understand. Now, I'm not an advocate of using machines all the time, but every tool has a benefit if used appropriately. And cables and bands are wonderful examples of that.
Mhm.
And these guys that are free weight purists need to understand if you have a simple setup and you only have free weights, kettlebells, dumbbells, barbells, that's fantastic. And I can make the most of that for you. But if you have access to other things, don't scoff at it.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Next question is two-part question. Um, how, if at all, did your training as a high-level collegiate athlete prepare you for your experience in the military? So part one. And then part two, when you consider the military experience, how has your experience as a tactical operator prepare you for what you are doing today with your athletes?
A great question. I would say the biggest thing for college football that prepared me for the military was resilience and focus and being able to compartmentalize. Because when you combine in college the academic workload with the athletic workload with the social life, if you combine it all in your mind at once, you have a hard time. You start to feel overwhelmed, like you can't possibly do it all. So learning how to focus on only what you can do in that moment and do that thing well and prioritize what needs to be done now and what is it that I'm thinking about that's not going to help me in this moment and not think about that stuff. That kind of helped me in the military because those are really the only two similarities. That's not true. I mean, being able to work as a team, understanding your role, is very important. Being mission and task oriented is very important. But as far as that, I think that was a huge aspect for me, is learning how to manage workload and understanding that setbacks weren't always failures, you know.
Mhm.
And then I just basically carry that forward out of the military when, you're dealing with athletes that are dealing with a lot of the same stuff you are and feel like there's so many things being piled upon them that they can't handle it all. Cause an example I have is like Ranger School. When if I told you everything we had to do in Ranger School, you're like, that's physically impossible, right? But normal dudes do that stuff all the time. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And because there's never any one day that's undoable. There's never any one moment of any one day that you can't do.
Mhm.
So one of my favorite sayings is like, you can't carry 100 pounds 100 miles, but you can carry that 100 pounds to the top of the next hill. That's all you have
Yes.
to worry about. Kids to not, quit tomorrow, never quit today kind of thing. And so these kids will come in and they're there and all they're talking about is what they're going to have to do for training the next day and how hard it's going to be. And I'm like, man, don't think about it. You're not there right now. You're right here. And when
Mhm.
you wake up tomorrow, you're not suffering. You're brushing your teeth or you're getting your breakfast. On the way to practice, you're not suffering. You're riding in a car, listening to music. Warming up for that practice, you're not suffering. You're warming up. There's going to be a very small segment in time that you're actually suffering. But if you think about that suffering when you don't need to, you exponentially increase the amount that you suffer. And
Mhm.
then pretty soon, your lizard brain is going to take over. And like, this organism that I'm attached to is suffering. I don't want him to suffer. So I'm going to convince him to quit this so the suffering will stop. It's
Mhm.
getting them to understand what's going on in their brain and that their brain isn't always their friend.
Yes,
You know,
for sure, for sure. I like that a lot, and your reference to the lizard brain, because yes, I talk to people about I say the reptile brain. It is trying to sometimes, and I talk about this when I'm talking to people about pain and discomfort during rehab. I tell them pain and discomfort are two different things, and I said sometimes you have some discomfort, which you can manage, but your reptile brain says, bro, there's a tiger over there in the woods that's going to get us. And sometimes you have to tell the lizard brain or the reptile brain, yo, this is a little bit of discomfort. There is no tiger over there in the woods.
that's
You're going
right.
to be fine,
That's
right?
so true, man. That's so
And
true.
you have to fight it sometimes, but
Yep.
that's what you have to do. And so yeah, I like that.
So we have two parts of our brains, right? And most of the time, the vast majority of the time, we're very comfortable. Well, I mean, let's be honest. We're not
Yes.
out of breath. We're not scared. We're not
Yep.
hungry or thirsty. All of our homeostasis needs have been met, right? And that's when our big frontal lobe takes over and we think all the self-actualization thoughts, all the motivational thoughts. But those are thoughts that was no good when the discomfort kicks in, because then the thinking shifts lower and further back, right? And then the thinking is survival, right?
Mhm.
So being motivated, I do not care if you're motivated. I could give a shit. I want you to be disciplined and dedicated and form habits, because those are the only things that are going to kick in when that frontal lobe takes a backseat to the lizard brain. When it's stress and it's discomfort. And I would say if you learn to form habits, then those habits will kick in. If you create a habit of being uncomfortable, you will that discomfort will have a familiar feeling, and it won't be a novel, panicky feeling to you. You know,
Yes. It's funny, so I'm in the military as well. I'm a reservist. And I would say to myself, I think that I am an independent thinker. And one of the things that drives me the most insane about the military is that, as you know, the military, there are lots of patterns. There are lots of like I always equate the military to the board. Like, you will be assimilated. There are lots of protocols. There are lots of repetition of certain steps that you have to do. And I think to myself, Jesus, this drives me nuts. But I do understand the reason why, because when shit hits the fan, as you say, you step out of your higher brain back to the lower brain, and at that point, when bullets are flying past and things are blowing up, and like, this guy's injured, and it's like, what the fuck, you have to shift back to what has become a pattern, right? And so that thought is not a part of it. It's just like, okay, repetition, right?
so so people think indoctrination is a bad thing. No, it's very important to indoctrinate these people. They used to make us say the Ranger Creed dozens of times a day in Ranger. It got so old. No matter, before we could do anything, we had to say the Ranger Creed, and that was for a very specific purpose. Because I learned this later, when things got hard in combat. I didn't remember the entire Ranger Creed, but snippets of it would come back to me. I'm expected to move further, faster, and farther than any other soldier. As a Ranger. I will do 100% and then some. I will complete the mission, though I be the last survivor. Those things would stick to me when it got hard, because they were indoctrinated into me. I couldn't say after a while the entire Ranger Creed start to finish, like some guys can, but those snippets would always come back to me. And indoctrination and repetition is a good thing in certain cases. It doesn't mean you don't think for yourself.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Let's switch gears for a second. Retired Special Forces operator Pat McNamara. He and I have spoken a few times, and one of the things that we talked about on one of those occasions was training with odd objects, okay, and unusual movements in tactical training. And this is something that you talked about a little bit previously, and I noticed how in your Instagram feed you have a lot of things that people would say are unconventional movements, unusual movements. So when you look at training performance athletes versus tactical operators, what is the role of these movements, and is it different between the two populations? And do you think that these movements that you're looking at, and I guess this goes back to our conversation about physical literacy, do you think they're universally applicable, or of comparative value in these two different arenas?
I would have to say that yes, I believe they're universally applicable. Because here's the thing: humans are chains. We're links. We're linked together. We have a posterior chain. We're chained together from our foot all the way to our chin. With different joints, things have to work together and in sequence, right?
Mhm.
And we're only as strong and as capable as the weakest link in that chain. So if you're only doing things, and there are times when you need to isolate a muscle, right, in order to put as much force on that one muscle as you can. I got that. But if you are never training things in chains when things aren't perfectly loaded, they're not perfectly balanced. You have to be ground based. You have to activate your core before you apply pressure on a heavy object. If you're never doing that, you're never going to be able to exhibit your strength optimally. And you're never going to be able to absorb or react to forces that come at you optimally. Because even though your pec might be strong, if your left oblique is not, and the object is loading your left pec, you're going to crumble. you
Mm-hmm.
know? So you have to train chains. Like people don't look, they need to look at what I'm doing. I'm training the chains. I call it sequencing or flow sometimes, but I'm training my muscles to work together in sequence to try to limit, to try to ensure as much as possible that there's not a weak link in that chain,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Okay. I got a few more and then we'll get you out of here, man. So do you think that mobility training, physical literacy play a role in human performance? Or do you think that they are more relegated to the realm of rehabilitation and recovery?
Definitely the former. You know what I mean? I don't ever see a human being exhibit athleticism where it isn't in some form of what you just said. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? I don't see athletes do things that where they aren't required to be functionally trained, you know? And I think we have to be careful with this. Functional just means what it means. Like it has to function, help you function. A leg extension on a machine serves a function, right?
Mhm.
If that's all you do, it's not necessarily helping you be more functional, but it's helping that function of the knee extension, the tendon robustness, forcing the rectus femoris to contract from a fixed state. So it's serving its function. With no planning or direction, people will stand on these balance balls and think that's functional training. Well, what function is that training?
Mhm.
So the term functional training gets abused more than anything else. Back squats and deadlifts are functional training because they serve a function. Most things serve a function. The question isn't function. The question is that the function that you need to optimize right now? Is that the function that you need that you are the weakest at? So
Mhm.
it's not functional or non-functional. It's like, well, everything has a function. What function do you need?
I hear you. I hear you. Um, so one of the things that you said at the start, and now that we're getting towards the end here, I want to come back to for a moment. And this, you talked about kids being able to develop skills and every kid being able to accomplish things. Do you think that it is? Do you think that it is possible to improve skills and performance of any athlete? Why or why not?
It is possible to improve skills of every athlete. Now, we all have our genetic limitations, right? And I understand that. I just feel like genetic limitations, which are very real, get focused on before we have optimized what we are naturally capable of doing first, right?
Mhm.
And usually the limits to that is the amount of passion that the athlete has. So I always say we're tied to our kid with a rope. We can't push a rope. We can let our kid pull us in the direction they want to go. And passion is the thing that's going to limit your success, you know? And you can tell me you want it, you can tell me you're hardworking, but only people that are passionate about what they do are going to go until the absolute limits of their natural performance. So I think, yes, there is a limit to what a person can do. You're not going to take a normal guy off the street, and no matter how passionate is he is about 100-meter sprinting, he's never going to be able to beat Usain Bolt. I mean,
Mhm.
let's be honest there. But he will never, almost assuredly, in his life, be as fast as he could have been. Almost assuredly, unless that guy is driven by a passion that you can't do away with. You know what I mean? So it really is passion, man. You
Mhm.
know, I don't know if that answered your question, but yes, everyone can improve. The limit of their improvement is based far less on genetics. It's rather that passion that they have when they approach it.
No, I think that's reasonable, man. So second last question. Where can people find you?
So if they need to contact me right now, it's through my two email addresses. So contact@juddlionheart.com or Instagram DM. I still try to answer those best I can. They might be short answers, unfortunately, but I try to respond. Or right now I'm currently working at Acceleration. I'm a co-owner there in Austin, Texas. And those are the main three avenues to get a hold of me. But yeah, man, I still want to, at the end of the day, however popular I get or whatever, we all need to remember that we're servants and we're here to serve people. And, I don't want to ever discourage people reaching out to me if they need something because I want to serve as best I can.
Perfect, man. I appreciate that. This is an add-on question, but one of your first things you said to me made me put this one. who is your favorite superhero, bro?
When I was little, man, it was kind of a tie between the Hulk, obvious for obvious reasons, and Spider-Man, right? But I have a son who's 8 years old, and he loves Spider-Man, and Spider-Man has become my hands down favorite now. Everything Spider-Man just makes me warm inside, and because he's a guy that he's young at heart, he's a teenager, and he'll always be a teenager, and he's not one of these worldwide superheroes, because it's always your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He's a superhero in his own community. And
Mhm.
I think the metaphor there with Stanley was very intentional.
Mhm.
You before you be a superhero to the world like Superman, be a superhero to your own community first. And I just
Mhm.
love that message that he sends, right?
For sure, for sure. Think global, but act local, you know?
There you go. I love it.
So listen, Judd, I want to thank you very much for being a part of the discussion today. This was very enlightening. I have more questions now than I have answers. So I would love to have you back at some point in the future where we can discuss some other things more in depth. But again, thank you very much for taking the time out to be with us today. That was amazing, man.
I love talking to you, man. A lot in common, and anytime. Hopefully, I'll get the time zones right next time.
That's all right. I'll know. I'll know. So when we're planning, we'll get it right. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, brother. Good talking to you.